dark day in Israel. And Tuesday morning, Israelis woke up, brewed their coffee, and sat down to read their newspapers. Regardless of which newspaper they were reading, they were greeted not by the typical array of headings and pictures, but instead of the black cover pages you see before you, the captions read, "A black day for Israeli democracy." And a dark day it was. The radical right-wing coalition governing the Knesset in Israel passed the Reasonableness Bill. This bill limits the Israeli Supreme Court's ability to overrule legislation passed by the majority government. In the parliamentary democracy that governs Israel, the independent judiciary serves as a check on the power of the Knesset, able to review the reasonableness of decisions made by the Israeli cabinet, government ministers, and other elected officials. According to the American Jewish Committee, those in favor of this law believe that the current standards for judicial intervention is too subjective, and because it allows the High Court to subvert government authority, it contradicts the rule of law. Elected officials, they say, are chosen by the voters to make decisions on matters great and small, and it is not for judges to decide questions of values. Critics of the legislation, including Israel's Attorney General, say that reasonableness is an essential part of an Israeli legal system and is one of the few measures that judiciary has to check on the excess of Israel's heavily centralized executive branch of government. Canceling that standard, they say, would remove the only tool for reviewing arbitrary and highly unreasonable decisions by the government. This is made more important in countries without a written constitution, like in Israel. Currently, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu presides over the most right-wing and ultra-Orthodox Israeli government in Israel's history. Without a check of systems and balances on its power, it will continue to pursue goals that disenfranchise and endanger minority groups and undermine any version of Judaism that doesn't align with an ultra-Orthodox interpretation. A dark day for Israeli democracy indeed. On Monday night, I found myself doom-scrolling through our newspaper articles, one after another, sinking into a pit of despair. It almost felt as though Tisha B'Av had come early as we collectively cried out to God, Eicha, how could this be? And so I welcomed Tisha B'Av on Wednesday night and was invited by the invitation to sit in grief and despair as I imagined what might become of the Israel that I so deeply love. Because I do love Israel, even of its multi-layered complexity and its deep flaws. It's a homeland that allows us to dream and build a place where the values of our faith become manifest in everyday life. But my dream of Israel, the dream of a democratic Jewish state that creates space for all peoples to live with integrity and dignity, and yes, with holiness, is only possible if we hold one another accountable to that dream. So Wednesday night, I sat with our community as we sang from Psalm 137 and remember how we wept by the rivers of Babylon. I allowed the words of Isaiah to reverberate within my soul as we beseeched God to comfort us as we wander through the wilderness. And I prayed for strength and courage and fortitude for our partners in Israel who do the holy work of creating an inclusive democracy each and every day in Israel. And just as Tisha B'Av begins with despair but ends with hope, so too did I begin to move into a space of hope for Israel. Because despite the bitter reality of the Reasonableness Bill, there's always light even in the midst of darkness. And that light reminds us that there are good people doing good work to demonstrate that the majority of Israeli citizens do not support this government's agenda. We're seeing some of the most widespread protests in Israeli history. Orly Erez-Kikovsky, the director of the Israel Religious Action Center, shares that while we are right to be concerned, because Israel is in a fragile and dangerous state, these past 7 months, she says, have given us a lot of hope. We have a lot of rays of light that we should not stop thinking about and mentioning. The first of which, of course, is the awakening of the Israeli public. We must emphasize that it wasn't at all obvious, and none of us foresaw 7 months ago that we were going to face such an awakening of the Israeli public that's going to the streets in large numbers and actually saying all of the things that we at Iraq, at the Israeli Reform Movement, have been saying for years. We feel as though many of our issues, the issues of religion and state, the demand for equality and respect for everyone here in Israel, have become crystal clear. They're not hidden anymore, but they're out in the open. And the fact that Israelis are now talking about those issues, and so many people stand for them and believe how important they are, she thinks, she says, is a tremendous positive development forward. Our rabbinic colleagues in Israel shared similar thoughts and sentiments to Orly. And as we sit at our homes here, in our sanctuaries, in our temples and congregations in the West, for many of us, our hearts are in the East. So we asked what it was that our colleagues, Reform rabbis serving communities in Israel, would like our congregations here in America to know about this moment. And I'm delighted to share some of their beautiful and moving and eloquent words as a response to you on this Shabbat. Rabbi Chaim Shalom said, "I want you to talk about hope. I want you to talk about love. I want you to talk about how hard it is to see a country one love choosing a dangerous path of self-harm. I want you to make clear that democracy is not just the tiny, thin majority enforcing its will on the minority. And it is true wherever we are. There are universal moral truths which we cannot turn our backs on. This is the message of this week's Torah portion, the coming together of Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 Commandments, as a symbol of the most fundamental moral truths, and our credo of Shema Yisrael, the statement of the particular Yisrael, but focused on the universal, on Echad, or one. We turn to each other as fellow members of the people of Israel to remind each other of the oneness of creation. We are all in this together. Whenever one part of the human family falls, it affects us all. And so, yes, we all have a piece in this tragic outcome, but not equally. The people who will suffer most are those who are already weakest. Palestinians, LGBTQ Israelis, women, the poor, the disadvantaged. These are the people who have lost their protection today. Democracy isn't just by the people and of the people. It must also be for the people, all the people. This great injustice is part of a long abandonment of universal values which the people of Israel have allowed to happen for far too long. This loss of democracy for Israelis is natural end of our giving up on democracy when we've become comfortable with a never-ending occupation. But this is not the end. By the time Shabbat comes around, we will be on the other side of Tisha B'Av, and while that is a day of mourning, it is also a testament to our resilience, our tenacity, and our ability to continue to survive and adapt. We shall overcome because we have hope, because we have love. Thank you for loving us. We love you, and we won't stop fighting for this country. Rabbi Rinat Stefania said, "As you know, our country is burning. It's a sad and difficult afternoon here. Yet the protests brought many and different people out of their houses to show how important this country is to them and how unwilling they are to give up on democracy, civil rights, and matters of religion and state. We hope that this protest will also lead people to choose by their feet and join liberal movements like the Reform movement. We have work to do in all fields, and the road is long. The hope is 2,000 years old, as it says in Hatikva, and it does not end with one decision or another. There is a large movement of protest here, and alongside it, a movement of people who want to continue holding hands despite all the differences. We as the Reform movement and communities are here to hold on to that hope, even when darkness seems to be falling." Rabbi Liora Ezrachi-Vered said, "It is hard to see and hard to watch from afar, and the reality is certainly very, very concerning. But there are huge waves of people working for a better Israel, and it's not the end, but a pit that we can climb out of, like Yosef. Like all those who are struggling, we need friendship and solidarity more than ever. The rabbis and the members of the Reform movement in Israel are frontline activists." Rabbi Stacy Blank says, "Do not despair. Continue to educate ourselves and our communities about the issues from both sides. To be leaders in dialogue, to delve into the idea that all Israel is responsible for one another. to talk about the dangers of sinat chinam, of baseless hatred, to ask questions about reform and progressive Zionism, to question how we can be supportive of Israel and supportive of reform and progressive Zionist values, to ask how important every single person is to the success of Israel, both those of us who live here and those who live elsewhere. Od lo avda tikvatenu liotam chofshi be'artzenu. Our hope is not lost. Our hope is to be a free people in our own land. On this Shabbat, we pray, may the words of these rabbis lift us out of our despair. May they give us heart as they have gifted us with hope. Shabbat Shalom.